Early in the morning, James arrived at the lumber workshop, where Tuan was busy checking inventory and reviewing the books. The end-of-year atmosphere buzzed with energy, the sound of chainsaws echoing through the forest. Yet, in the small office behind the workshop, a much quieter conversation was taking place. Tuan handed James the financial report, his voice steady. Revenue this year is about 7 billion. After deducting operating costs, TET bonuses and depreciation, net profit stands at around 1.2 billion. James nodded, his eyes fixed on the pages, though his tone slowed as he moved on to another matter. I heard one of the workers just found out his mother has late-stage cancer. Look into their situation. If the family's struggling, offer financial help in advance if needed. Tuan hesitated for a brief moment before replying, I'll verify and get back to you. James looked up, his eyes sharp, but he didn't press further. Instead, he sat silently for a while before asking quietly, Have you heard anything about Diep? Tuan stiffened slightly, then shook his head, keeping his voice neutral. Since that incident, she hasn't reached out. But the truth was, Tuan knew exactly where she was. He was the one who had taken Diep away, hiding her in a small house deep in the forest, hoping to shield his sister from pressure and impossible choices. That afternoon, Tuan went to meet James's father in silence. The older man was seated in the living room, his gaze stern as always. Tuan placed his hand on the envelope containing the money once offered to Diep, now returned in full. His voice was firm. I can't let my sister trade love for money. My mother needs treatment, I know that. But if I save her by forcing Diep to give up the man she loves, I'll never find peace. James's father looked at him, his expression shifting slightly at the word sister. He asked quietly, She's your biological sister? Tuan nodded. We were separated as children. My mother recognized her from the birthmark on her neck. There was a long silence before the older man let out a quiet sigh. Not because of the returned money, but because in Tuan's eyes he saw something he had long forgotten. Loyalty to family, and a kind of dignity that money could never buy. Tuan knew the road ahead would be hard, but at the very least, he wouldn't let his sister continue carrying burdens that were never meant to be hers. No matter how poor, no matter how desperate things became, he would find a way to protect both his mother and Diep. Honestly, and with his own hands. The morning was bitterly cold, and a thick mist still lingered over the old wooden rooftops. Tuan brought his mother to meet Diep at the small house nestled in the village, where she had been quietly staying. The elderly woman stepped inside, her frail body trembling, eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and deep emotion as she saw the young woman crouched by the fire. Diep turned around, confused by the sudden visit, until Tuan gently said, Diep, this is Mum, your biological mother. Diep froze. She stared at the woman, gaunt face, graying hair, eyes aged with decades of longing. A trembling hand reached out, brushed aside her hair, and the woman burst into tears the moment she saw the familiar birthmark on the back of Diep's neck. It's you. It really is you. My daughter. In that moment, every buried ache in Diep's heart came rushing to the surface. She collapsed into her mother's arms, crying like a child. After more than 20 years of orphanhood and hurt, she had never imagined there would come a day when she would find her own flesh and blood again. After the emotional reunion, the three of them sat together, piecing together the scattered memories of the past. Diep learned how she had gone missing, how her mother had believed she had died, and why Tuan had always quietly looked after her, never revealing the full truth. But their joy was short-lived. Tuan, his voice heavy, revealed the painful reality that their mother was in the final stage of cancer. Treatment would require an enormous sum. Money none of them had. Diep sat in silence, her hand gripping the fabric of her sleeve tightly. That evening she went to meet James's father. In the quiet wooden room, her eyes were still determined but no longer as strong as before. In front of him was the same envelope with the $20,000 she had once refused. This time, Diep lowered her gaze, her hand trembling as she placed it on the table. I'll accept the money. In return, please don't interfere in James's life anymore. James's father looked at her for a long moment. His expression held surprise but also something resembling regret. Diep stood, her voice soft but unwavering. I'm not doing this for the money, it's just that if I have to choose between the mother waiting for me out there and the love I once held dear, I can't be selfish. When she walked out of that room, Diep didn't cry. But deep inside, something in her had died. She had chosen to sacrifice again, this time for family. And in doing so, she gave up the love she once believed would carry her to the end of her days. After accepting the money from James's father, Diep made her way to the lumber workshop where Tuan worked. In her hands was a small cloth bag containing the full $20,000 she had reluctantly agreed to take. Her face was pale from lack of sleep, but her eyes remained resolute. She showed no emotion as she stepped into the makeshift office at the back of the workshop, where Tuan was busy reviewing end-of-day reports. Tuan looked up, surprised to see his sister standing there. Before he could speak, Diep placed the bag on the table. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I took the money. I didn't want to, but Mum needs treatment. Take it, get her to the hospital right away. I'll be gone after that." Tuan looked at the bag, then at his sister. The room instantly grew heavier. He knew how much she must have endured to make this decision. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the bag, stacks of cash revealing themselves like wounds carved into his pride. He said nothing, just nodded quietly. Diep turned and walked out quickly. She didn't want to cry in front of her brother, didn't want anyone to see that even though she had chosen this path, it felt like she had just cut away a piece of her own heart, leaving behind a love she once believed would last a lifetime. Tuan sat there for a long time. He didn't touch the money. His mind was full of images of his sister pushing through pain for their mother, sacrificing everything to keep her alive. His fist clenched. No matter how critical their mother's condition was, he couldn't let Diep trade away her love like a commodity. That evening, Tuan arrived at James's father's estate. The man was calmly sipping tea, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned. Tuan entered, placed the money back on the table and said firmly, "I can't accept this. This isn't the price of silence or surrender." James's father looked up, slightly startled. Tuan continued, giving him no chance to interrupt. "My sister has already suffered enough. If money is what's needed to save our mother, I'll find it myself, through loans, work, whatever it takes, but I won't let her carry the guilt of selling her heart for the rest of her life." The room fell silent. No argument, no rebuttal, but in the older man's eyes the arrogance had faded. In its place was something quieter, more human, something close to respect. Offered to a brother who had shown the strength to place family above all temptation. That afternoon, after returning the money to James's father, Tuan went straight to James's office in town. Without waiting for an invitation, he walked in, eyes resolute. James looked up, surprised to see him, but before he could say anything, Tuan bowed deeply. "I'm not here because of my sister. I'm here for my mother. She doesn't have much time left. I need help." James stood up. He didn't ask questions or pass judgment. He looked straight into Tuan's eyes, his voice low and sincere. "How much do you need?" Tuan answered without hesitation. "The hospital said it'll take around 400 to 500 million for the next stage of treatment. I'll work for you for 3 years, any job, anything, as long as I can save my mother." James stepped forward and placed a hand on Tuan's shoulder. "You don't need to sell yourself. I'll help, not because of Diep, but because I believe you're someone who would do the right thing." Tuan stood still, his throat tight. In James's eyes he saw something rare, trust, the kind he rarely received from strangers. The next day, with Tuan's help, James finally found where Diep was staying. The small house sat quietly halfway up a hill, its thatched roof low and wooden walls weathered with time. Diep was tending the fire when she turned and gasped at the sight of James. She stepped back, eyes wide with panic, but James didn't reproach her. He walked forward, gently took her hand and said softly, "I know why you left. I'm not angry, but I want you to stop running." Diep lowered her head, tears slipping down uncontrollably. "I didn't want you to sacrifice your future. I didn't want my mother to die, and I didn't want you to suffer because of me." James paused, then quietly responded, "Love isn't only about sharing happiness, it's what stays even through pain. You don't have to choose between me and your mother. We'll carry everything together." Just then, Tuan stepped inside. The air shifted. He looked at Diep, then turned to face James's father, who had come along silently. But this time, Tuan's eyes held no anger, only a sense of duty. He spoke directly. "You may not accept this, but you have no right to decide how others should live their lives forever." The words hung in the air. James's father remained silent for a long moment. Then, looking at Diep and back at his own reflection in that moment, he saw someone else. A younger version of himself, once poor, once mocked, once in love without apology, now sitting across from him. He exhaled deeply. "I was wrong. James, you have the right to choose. If this is your path, live it fully." With that, he stood up, nodded quietly in farewell, and left Vietnam, carrying with him a silent shift deep in his heart. After all the storms, James brought Diep back to the small hut nestled quietly between the hills. The place that once held so many memories had been carefully restored, its roof reinforced, the bamboo walls patched, and the small garden out back now surrounded by a new wooden fence. The fresh mountain air and the faint scent of smoke from the kitchen made everything feel renewed, almost as if the past had been washed away. Diep stood in the yard, eyes wide in awe, while James smiled gently, his voice soft and warm. "I promised I'd rebuild this place. For us, a true beginning." Tuan was there too, helping James carry supplies and repair the back section of the house. They didn't exchange many words, but the looks they gave each other were enough to say it all. Two men who once stood on opposite sides, now united by one purpose: to protect the woman they both cherished in their own way, using everything they had. That afternoon, as the sun burned crimson across the mountain ridge, James unexpectedly kissed Diep in the shaded backyard. She barely had time to react before Tuan's teasing voice cut in from behind. "You two are acting like no one's watching." Both James and Diep flushed with embarrassment. Diep laughed softly and invited Tuan to stay for dinner. The meal was laid out beneath the warm yellow glow of the small kitchen's light. Steamed vegetables, a pot of mountain fish soup, and bowls of hot rice. Simple dishes, but rich with affection. They sat side by side, like a real family. James turned to Tuan, bringing up the lumber workshop. "If you'd like, after 3 years, I can hand over management of the branch to you. I trust you're more than capable." Tuan nodded, saying nothing, but the appreciation in his eyes said everything. After dinner, Diep leaned her head gently on James's shoulder and whispered, "Real love, it's not always perfect." James smiled, squeezing her hand tightly. "No, it comes with pain, anger, and sacrifice. But if we don't let go of each other, then it's always worth it." Outside, the wind blew softly like a blessing. The fire's glow reflected on their faces. 3 people, 3 hearts once broken, now sitting together with gratitude and hope. In the stillness of the mountains, love didn't need grand declarations. A glance, a quiet smile. That was enough to know they would never lose each other again.
Nỗi nghèo khổ từng bị chồng bỏ rơi, không cha không mẹ, mình không xứng đáng. Cô tự nhủ, đôi mắt mờ đi vì những giọt nước mắt kìm nén. Diệp bước chân ra, đôi tay gầy guộc ôm lấy mình để xua đi cái lạnh của cơn gió sớm. Cô cúi xuống nhìn Haki, chú chó đang bẫy đuôi bên chân cô, và mỉm cười yếu ớt. Haki, bạn đã đói chưa? Cô hỏi với giọng dịu nhẹ nhàng như nói với một người bạn thân thiết. Cô lấy chút thức ăn căn bếp nhỏ xuống, đặt xuống quan sát Haki ăn ngấu nghiến với đôi mắt long lanh. Nhìn chú chó, cô cảm thấy lòng nhẹ nhõm hơn một chút, nhưng nỗi dây dứt về giam vẫn không ngừng gõ cửa tâm hồn cô. Mình đã từ chối anh ấy, nhưng tại sao là mình đại đâu như thế này?